usually.
Well, I'll let you say their name because you like to say it, but on the Nordstream two thing, we have an Indie Media Award honoree writing a follow up. Well, of course, we told you so, and that's about Nordstream and our confirmations that U.S. and NATO were behind blowing up Nordstream, allegedly, right? But Moon of Alabama and Alabama, as Reef is always there
how
to
you
say
it.
That is how you say it, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So some small corrections to Seymour Hersh's new Nordstream revelations. And I love Moon of Alabama because while everybody's gushing over Cy Hersh, they're like, yeah, but at the same time, Cy Hersh is legendary investigative reporter who's revealed dozens of crimes. His latest piece, destruction of the Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic Sea by U.S. government forces, released an enormous amount of methane, global warming gas, right? It destroyed Germany's gas lifeline with Russia. We know this, heavily damaged Germany's industry, ecological, economic terrorism by the U.S., of course, targeted at an ally, not just one ally, but actually all of the allies that are the owners of the pipeline. I think that they may even get to that, but if not, I can make that correction. Story is that his sources telling him is largely the same one that they had constructed from open sources on September 28th, the day after it was blown up. And here they are. But the story is, first of all, true. U.S. officials deny it means nothing. Actually, it's kind of confirmation that it is true. Previous revelations on domestic spying by CIA on My Lai massacre, Abu Ghraib, were also denied, but eventually were all proven to be true. The story about the pipelines makes complete sense. Unfortunately, there are some details for lack of access he gets wrong or they disagree with his assessment, which is that the story makes complete sense. Like I said, he writes that last June, the Navy divers were participating in Baltops 22, which planted the remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines. However, it's unlikely that the explosives were put out while the yearly Baltops exercise was still ongoing. Current Wikipedia entry about it even says, right, that they happened between the 5th and the 17th, but that you'll see which one. Okay, they had the usual mine hunting exercise was augmented this year with experimental mine hunting unmanned underwater vehicles and the collection of environmental data sets for target recognition algorithms in conjunction with the Naval Undersea Warfare Center and the Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific. The whole exercise only took about 12 days. A lot of nations took part. Submarines were involved. Russians were around watching what was happening. They also had submarines in the wider area, right? So they couldn't have really done it then. Mm-hmm. These are not good conditions to do a secret underwater work. It was much easier to do this later.
Underwater work.
When everyone had turned back to port. The U.S. ships, though, did not sail home. They stayed around, did some harbor visits, and eventually settled near the island of Bornholm. Keep that name in mind. A few miles away from where the pipelines, where they started to do their work. And here is where the pipeline was hit.
What's the name of the island? Bornholm?
That would be Bornholm. And here's where the pipeline was hit.
My.
Yeah. There's where the leakage was, and then there was leakage there, so there were charges there. That was Nord Stream 2. This is Nord Stream 1. And there are 2 pipes for each one. So, how about that? So, 4 pipelines, 2 for 1, 2 for 2, like I said, are strong. Steel pipe itself has a wall of 4.1 centimeters. I mean, almost an inch and a half thick, coated with another 6 to 11 centimeters of steel reinforced concrete. Each section weighs 11 tons. Which goes 24 to 25 tons after the concrete's applied. The pipelines are also buried in the sandy sea ground, not deep, but deep enough to prevent fishing equipment or anchors from damaging them. That makes Perfect sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in order to blow such pipelines, it takes a lot more than just putting a few pounds of C4 explosives on top of them. The pipelines had to first be dug out, most likely with pressurized water. Next, explosives had to be placed all around them, and then a trigger mechanism of some kind had to be deployed and fixed onto them. And then lastly, the
Didn't we
explosive
didn't
what's
we
that?
cover we covered something that was it was internally exploded, right?
Yes. Yes, and I don't remember where I've been looking for that article, and I think it was sometime in November. We covered one from spectator.au, but it didn't have that thing. But yes, it proved that it couldn't have come from internally. It had to come from externally.
Okay.
But the explosive laden section would have to be reburied in order to prevent detection or unforeseen entanglement with some external elements. All of this had to be done at least 4 times. If I planned the operation, I probably would have gone for a total of 8 explosive packages. That's whole process takes time. Unmanned submarine-like vehicles were needed. Check this out. Oh, to carry, were needed to carry the hundreds of kilograms of explosives and equipment. Diving time at that depth is not unlimited, and there must have been a few crew changes. It probably took 3 or 4 weeks to fix this whole issue. Fix the whole issue, quote unquote. Right? When I wrote about the incident, I translated a German language report which Hersh likely had not found. And here's the original translation from back in September. Maybe this was even the article when we were talking about a Ukraine update and updating and blowing up the pipeline. Okay, which was that, again, this was in German, translated, that on Wednesday morning the amphibious ship Kearsarge, and keep that name in mind, escorted by the landing ships Arlington and Gunston Hall, was en route towards west. Previously, the ships were part of U.S. units that took part in NATO maneuvers and called at numerous ports in Germany, Scandinavia, and the Baltic states. The Kearsarge, right, flagship of the association and the largest warship of the U.S. Navy, which was in action in the Baltic Sea in the last 30 years, has 40 helicopters and fighter planes, as well as more than 2,000 soldiers on board. The escort ships about 1,000. For the around 4,000 soldiers are heading back home on the East Coast after the U.S. After the 6-month deployment. I mean, it's a massive ship, is the point. So the Kearsarge was much longer in the Baltic than Hersh presumes. The explosives were put down sometime between the end of Baltops in June and September 22nd, which was the date that the Kearsarge passed Fehmarn to leave the Baltic Sea. They didn't leave until 6 days before the charges were set. Right?
Okay.
But here's the thing. Here's why Hersh errs when he later writes about that Washington had second thoughts and that the bombs would still be planted, but the White House worried that a 2-day window for their detonation would be too close to the end of the exercise. It'd be obvious that America had been involved. Again, it's only 6 days after these guys had left that the thing goes boom anyway. Instead, the White House had a new request. Could they come up with a way to blow the pipelines later on command? That was what Hersh came up with from Hersh's source. He said that window was not extended by months between the end of Baltops and the explosions, but by a mere few days between somewhat around September 20th, when Kearsarge went on its way back home, and the 27th, when the pipelines exploded. So it wasn't actually planted. They used that as the reason to bring the ship into the area, and then they left it there until 6 days before the thing went boom. Okay, the piece starts with this, and I don't remember that there was a sub-headline to do it or some sentences about the war in Ukraine, but now the piece reads that on Thursday morning, the 22nd, a fleet group from the U.S. Navy passed Fehmarn. The USS Kearsarge's flagship was the biggest of the warships. So that was from some visible sighting within Germany. And the breakdown then was that Russian nuclear submarines and NATO units were in the Strait of Fehmarn. Ships sail again in western direction. 40 helicopters and warplanes were on board. I don't know how they counted that, or they just know that that was the capacity. But what they said was that at the point, and this was again in German translated into English by Moon of Alabama, quote, with the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, which began in February, and of course we know, and with the change in security policy it caused with NATO entry requests by Finland and Sweden, the Baltic has become a concentration area for naval forces of Russia and NATO. This can be seen in the increasing number of warships that have passed the Strait of Fehmarn Belt during the past few months. This counts for Russian nuclear submarines just as much for NATO units. On Thursday morning, a fleet group passed Fehmarn. Then follows seemingly unchanged the two paragraphs I had translated previously. It is some weird editorializing to add the now leading new parts to the old small piece by a local newspaper nearly a month after it was already published. Who initiated that? That's pretty interesting. The new part does not make sense. Baltops is a yearly exercise. Baltops 22 was the 51st of its kind. That it was held had nothing to do with the war in Ukraine. Agreed, but I think that it was the excuse for bringing in the Kearsarge. Mm-hmm. So they say, as far as they can tell, there were no nuclear submarines from Russia stationed in the way too shallow in the Baltic Sea. The home harbors of Russia's nuclear fleets are Murmansk and the northern Kola Bay. Murmansk is super deep, right? And the Kola Bay for the Northern Atlantic Fleet. And I'm not even going to Rybachi nuclear submarine base on Kamchatka Peninsula for the Pacific Fleet. That's all the way out. Well, we would consider west, but to them it's to the far east of their country. But it's on the side of the Pacific. It's above Japan. So when a Russian nuclear submarine passes Fehmarn, it's most likely one from Murmansk that takes part in a Russian fleet parade in St. Petersburg. That's like a Baltops yearly event. But to use that for warmongering is rather stupid. So end of excursion. So there really wasn't a war. There probably wasn't a Russian submarine in the area, is what they're implicating. I'm like, I read that whole thing 3 times. Like, what the hell are they trying to say? Oh, okay. So what they're saying is that there was no reason for the Russians to actually be in the area. So the implication that they were is probably some kind of propaganda that's coming out of Hersh's source. What was of interest in the piece I translated was not only the time when U.S. ships left, but also the remark that Kearsarge was the largest ship of the U.S. Navy that was in action in the Baltic in the last 30 years. It was likely selected for this purpose. It has. And this is what I was asking you about the other day was, tell me about a well deck on a ship. So it's...
Yep.
Go ahead.
Well, screw Google in the chat. Yeah, we launched hovercrafts out of them.
Yep.
So a well deck is essentially just an empty room of a ship that has a wall on that you can remove, and you can flood it with a particular amount of water. So it's like a dry dock on ship. So it's how you get like Amtraks out, landing craft, hovercraft. You know, it's like a moon pool with a wall removed.
Right. And then
sometimes there's a little floor. So like you do water training in there, so you don't have to be out in like the ocean. You can be like in the well deck, you know?
Yeah. Conventional landing craft can also float their way out of the beach. So like you said, that they've got like one hatch that they can flood and open it up so that they can float their way out when they get into... Yeah, he said that you're quiet. You got to pull your mic closer, dude. Oh, was it Discord?
Turn me up in Discord.
Oh,
because you probably have me real quiet.
Yeah, because you're loud always with your music, and you know you're John Fogerty and your Zima and your what's the joke? I don't even remember what the hula hoops, John Fogerty and Zima. Come on, it's Ernest Borgnine and basketball. Anyway, well deck.
Too young for this reference.
Basketball. Usually, the Kearsarge would be a too big missile target to be in the Baltic Sea, but the well deck comes in handy when one wants to test new underwater equipment or put explosives around pipelines. Both things come in handy. So, in support of Baltops, Sixth Fleet partnered with Navy Research Warfare, and this is why they brought it in, was because of this underwater equipment, quote unquote, underwater equipment. Right? And again, where did they say that
Underwater
the
equipment.
experimentation
So
was?
that's going to be, you're writing the next Austin Powers movie?
Yes,
What you're
underwater
doing?
equipment. Yeah. But they even announced it right here. Experimentation was conducted off the coast of Bornholm, Denmark, with participants from Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific, Naval Undersea Warfare Center Newport, and Mine Warfare Center Readiness and Effectiveness measuring, all under the direction of the U.S. Sixth Fleet Task Force 68. Frogs. Basically,
Why is it not
frogs.
69?
Frogmen. Bornholm is, of course, where the pipelines went. So, to them, the one new surprising item in the Hersh piece is the involvement of the Norwegian forces to trigger the explosions by sonar buoy signals from a P-8 Navy surveillance plane. I would have bet on Swedish, British, or Polish involvement, but Norway makes even more sense as it will profit from the Nordstream destruction, which is
Was that
accurate.
Graz over there? I forget their name.
Okay, I don't know.
Norwegian Special Forces.
Oh, yeah. Larry Johnson, who's an old friend of Cy Hersh, has found a video by someone who tracked a Norwegian P-8 flying in the pipeline area shortly before the explosion. So that kind of aligns too. Unfortunately for Norway, though it's on its own, now increased gas exports also depend on pipelines, of course. So on the day of the Nord Stream explosions, Denmark and Poland inaugurated a new pipeline that brings Norwegian gas to Poland. How about that? Russia certainly has no means.
So we blow up the dead fish pipe. What?
So Russia certainly has the means to do to Norwegian pipelines what the U.S. and Norway have done to Nord Stream. So another small quip was that Sweden had applied for NATO membership, right, and had demonstrated its great skill in managing underwater sound management, sensor systems, tracked Russian submarines, and that would occasionally show up in the remote waters of the Swedish archipelago, I like that word, and be forced to the surface. Except most of the Russian subs detected were never there. More than half of the many incidents, I love this, were unlikely violations, i.e. they never happened, or the great Swedish skill is to scare its own population with false alarms about alleged Russian submarines near its coast. Quote, in 1982, several of Sweden's subs, boats, and helicopters pursued one of these unidentified sources for a whole month only to come up empty-handed. What was it? Farts. It turns out herring have a swim bladder. Yes. And this swim bladder is connected to the anal duct of the fish. Literally, it was herring farts. Holy shit. Yes. Yep. And it was the bubbles that were coming out of the herrings. In layman's terms, they let one rip. Herrings swim in gigantic schools that can reach several square kilometers up to 20 meters deep. When something near frightens them, say a hungry school of mackerel or a submarine on the lookout for Russian spies, that can generate a whole lot of gas. So to test this theory...
Wait. We have the recording. You know this, right?
Oh, come on.
We found it. We heard them. Those Russian subs.
It was now even farts are Russian subs. MSNBC's not reporting this. So to test this theory, Wahlberg bought a herring from store and applied pressure, and sure enough, it made up. So he took the footage to the Navy personnel, played it back to them, and it was a perfect match for the noise that they'd been hearing.
Do you think they're going to get that same lady that did the Syrian backpack to smell these? So, yep, there's something there.
Oh my God. And yeah, I smell chlorine in the air. So the good news was that Sweden wasn't under threat from Russia. The bad news was that it had spent 10 years deploying its military in pursuit of fish farts. Since it figured out what it was and wasn't fish farts, there have been zero reports of hostile intruders in Swedish waters. So great Swedish skills indeed.